My name is Jeffrey Nuccetelli. I'm a former military police officer with 16 years of active duty service in the U.S. Air Force. I'm here today because the American people have both the right and the responsibility to know the truth about unidentified aerial phenomenon. That truth remains hidden, classified and silenced by fear, retaliation, stigma, and confusion. Today, we are here to help break that silence. The incursions began on October 14, 2003. When Boeing contractors reported a massive glowing red square silently hovering over two missile defense sites. Chaos ensued over the radio as the object approached rapidly. I heard my friends screaming, "It's coming right at us, it's coming right for us, and now it's right here." Moments later, I heard them say that it had shot off and was gone. Witnesses who described a massive triangular craft larger than a football field that hovered silently for about 45 seconds over their entry control point before shooting away at impossible speed. Eventually, it reappeared 200 feet over my house. It was a 30-foot diameter sphere of light. My friends and I watched it for a moment, and then it gently accelerated and traveled up and disappeared into the stars. Let this be the moment when America chooses courage over fear, transparency over secrecy, and progress over stagnation. Let's show the world that our nation leads not only through strength, but through fearless pursuit of the truth.
Welcome to Emergent. Today I'm joined by Jeffrey Nuccetelli, a career public servant, U.S. Air Force veteran, and advocate for truth and transparency regarding unidentified anomalous phenomena. In this conversation, Jeffrey and I get into his personal experiences of UAP. We'll talk about the 5 UAP incursions that took place at Vandenberg Air Force Base between 2003 and 2005, as well as this recurring pattern of UAP incursions during missile tests and the deployment of space-based emergent technologies. We'll talk about the intelligent behavior of UAP and discuss possible scenarios of intent, and how we, the public, and the legislative branch of government can blow through the barricades that are preventing us from moving down this road and gaining access to this truly new reality. We'll talk about ways that we can advance transparency in the public, fire up the international conversation on disclosure, and get more people thinking and talking about the possible reality of non-human intelligence. So with that, let's jump right in. Jeff Nuccetelli, thank you for joining me. Welcome to Emergent.
Thank you for having me. It's been a long time coming. Glad to be here.
Great to have this conversation. And just to kick things off, thank you so much for myself, and I know from the listeners, for stepping forward in front of Congress, testifying on the record, taking the personal and professional risks to do so on behalf of all of us, gaining greater insight into the truth behind this phenomenon. So we commend you for that.
Yeah,
I think anyone who has the courage to step in front of that kind of a microphone just needs to receive some gratitude at the beginning.
I appreciate that sincerely. That was a very intense experience. Yeah.
Let's actually start there. What was that like for you to come forward, go through the official channels and the official process to clear your testimony and statements, to do so with AARO, the All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office? I'm not sure if your information was submitted to the UAP task force as well, but it was certainly submitted for congressional, for review and approval to be presented before Congress. What was that process like?
Yeah, it was intense. It's one of the most important and difficult decisions I've ever made. So it goes back to around 2023, prior to the first hearing with David Grush and David Fravor and Ryan Graves. I had already been coordinating with Congress and speaking with them, and I had made it known that I was willing to testify at that point. But I was extremely nervous about coming out publicly. Mainly because of my background in the military and law enforcement, and as a federal employee. My career is very reputationally based. I handled a lot of sensitive material and really worked on some high profile operations in the federal government and with the DOJ. So I was really concerned about coming out publicly and, admitting and talking about these cases. But, for me, it was difficult over the years watching information about UFOs come out and seeing all the stigma and ridicule and knowing that some of these events are absolutely real and that our military members like me and my friends are running into UFOs. So I felt compelled. I had some evidence from the Vandenberg incursions. I had documentation, official Air Force records that the events had occurred and who was involved and who was notified. And I'd been sitting on that for a couple of decades, and I really didn't know what to do with that information or where to go. There was really nowhere to go. Until
Was the information vetted? Like, did you go through a Dobster type process to get it approved to be spoken to in front of Congress? What was the process like?
I didn't need to because they were personal records I had maintained. They were law enforcement records from the time of the incident. So I had made copies of them because I was involved in the investigation. And I had kept a lot of copies of various incidents I was involved in over the years. I had a file. And I was actually required by policy to keep a lot of my records, like my notebooks from incidents and reports and statements. So I had a lot of that data. And the information is unclassified. So it was for official use only. It did contain some protected information, like it has people's social security numbers on it and things like that. So I didn't want to just put it out. I wanted to protect, the names of the people involved, and it is official paperwork. So, the way it played out is Ryan Graves kind of opened the door for me and got me in contact with Congress. And then I did a mass briefing with many congressmen and their staffers. And then after that, I was able to provide them with redacted copies of the paperwork. And then later, after I got deeper into, the movement, I went to Aero and officially disclosed and provided them with the unredacted paperwork.
As our conversation goes on, I'd like to explore toward the end of the show kind of the scenario that faces whistleblowers and firsthand witnesses and veterans like yourself who want to come forward. And we'll talk about, what are the key kind of, fulcrum points where change needs to be enacted to enable people to come forward to disclose what they know about this phenomenon. So we'll get into that. But just curious about testifying in front of Congress. What was that experience like? I'm sure people are curious what that hot seat feels like, and what happened. What were were there any aha moments or insights that arose afterwards in terms of people who reached out to you? Any other things you can share on that regard?
Yeah, so testifying was one of the most intense and powerful and important moments of my life, really. So leading up to it, there was a lot of pressure. And then really the decision wasn't made until about 2 weeks prior to the hearing that I was selected. So at that point, I really had to get to work and figure out, I have a lot of things to talk about, 5 different cases and all the context. And I had to really work hard to figure out what I was trying to relate to the public and to Congress and jam that all into a 5-minute opening statement. So, I spent an incredible amount of time every day working on that, trying to figure out, what my message was, what I was trying to accomplish. So leading up to it was very intense and stressful. And I also didn't know who else I would be testifying with until, maybe about a week or 5 days before. So that was a little bit of anxiety. You don't know who you're going to be put out on stage with in front of the entire public. But then when I found out, who was testifying, I was very, very excited about the selectees. So, and then leading up to it, there was threats coming in to me and my family, leading up to the hearing, a month or two prior. And we did have some strange incidents occur. Definitely under surveillance, my
Mm.
family and I. So
Can
that
you,
kind of, yeah.
yeah, can you share more about the nature of those threats and how that manifested?
I don't want to get into a lot of the details, but there's a pattern
Hmm.
um, that some of the other people that have testified or whistleblowers have experienced. But I can tell you that I've been approached in public places by bad actors. Um, I've experienced digital surveillance. Uh, I've I've had very strange encounters in public and at my home
Mm.
with government um, actors, you could say. Strange
Yeah.
phone calls leading up and things like that. And they're, on the surface, that might just sound like paranoia, but without the context of everything that's going on, it might seem like that. But I'd have a very important call with somebody involved in the disclosure movement, and then I'd hang up that phone call. This is on an encrypted app, and then a minute later, a bad actor calls.
Mm.
So it's like somebody is monitoring my communications. They know who I'm talking
Hmm.
to, talking about, and they're letting me know that. So in short,
Right.
I was sent messages that we know you're getting ready to testify. We're watching you. And they were letting me know that I was being watched.
Hmm. It's very
So,
alarming and definitely a pattern I've heard
yeah,
reported by others.
yeah.
Well, thank you for moving through those choppy waters and getting up to the stage and to the microphone. Since then, I'm curious, after testifying, did your testimony or that of, I think it was Dylan Borland and George Knapp, did that call, and Andrew Wiggins, did that call out of the woodwork any other individuals, veterans, witnesses? Did anyone else reach out to you with other insight that was
Yeah.
possibly eye-opening?
Yeah, there was a lot of people from Vandenberg that reached out after that. The hearing had a huge impact on the general
Hmm.
public. People that were stationed with me 20 something years ago at Vandenberg that knew nothing about the hearings. They don't know about the disclosure movement. They reached out and in droves. They said, "We remember these incidents. There were other incidents that I was aware of, but didn't have a lot of detail on, that they provided more information on those." So yeah, there was a flood on my end of people that were at Vandenberg during that time frame that either saw things or remember it playing out. So that was really vindicating for me, that all those people reached out and congratulated us, and they were proud of what we were doing, because they don't have a voice. This is all about
Right.
trying to give people a voice, and that's what the hearing was really about. The men and women serving in uniform are running into things that are supposed to be impossible, but they're real. And then when we speak out about them, we're ridiculed, we're punished, and your life can fall off of a cliff just for speaking truth.
Hmm.
So
Right.
yeah.
Well, so important that more people do come out. If, as you have shared, reality is classified. We'll talk about this more later in the show, as well as in the part 2 of the show. For those who are members of YouTube membership, what is the reality behind the classification itself? Like, why is this classification being imposed to such an extraordinary degree on these base and fundamental facts about life, the universe, other forms of intelligent, you know, entities that might exist? Why such an extreme step? So we'll get into that. For those who are not aware, could you please briefly walk through listeners the 5 incidents that took place at Vandenberg Air Force Base between 2003 and 2005, which I believe was kind of the centerpiece of your testimony?
Yeah, so it all began October 14th, 2003, 8:45 in the morning. There were 3 Boeing contractors working on top secret project, the National Missile Defense Project. This was next generation technology that was supposed to give us, aerospace domination for the next, 30 years. So extremely important technology. And these Boeing contractors were working on a launch pad on the north end of the base. And someone walked out of the hangar And there was this enormous 100-yard floating red square just hovering at low altitude over the pad. And this guy just looks up in disbelief. He observes it for a bit of time. Then he calls his two coworkers out. They all view it for an extended period of time, and then they called it in. They called the range control. That's a command center that oversees all the various launch facilities, and they conducted an investigation. They tried to find out if it was a weather balloon, anything on radar, and on and on. Ends up that there was nothing in the air, no weather balloons. So this was an anomalous object. And then they notified the base police, and that's how my friends got involved. My friends responded out to the area and met with the contractors. During that time frame, the object had floated onto the base, and they lost sight of it as it went over a hill. So by the time my friends got there, there was nothing in the air. And they took sworn written statements from these contractors. They conducted an investigation, and then they upchanneled all of that to headquarters. They did a police report. They put it in our it's called a blotter. It's a chronological record of everything that happens on the shift. It's a police record, and they annotated that in the blotter with all the witnesses, all the information, a short narrative. And everyone that was notified in the chain of command, including my commander and the wing commander, and on and on. So I walked into that. I came on duty that evening, and that had already happened in the daytime. So I received that briefing from the cops that had actually gone out and responded, my counterparts. And then me and my friends went on duty for the night shift. And then sometime around midnight, my friend Chaz King was a security guard on the southern end of the base on another launch pad. And they saw another strange light over the ocean behaving erratically. It was way too bright. The colors were weird. And it was, looked like it might be an aircraft coming in to approach. So they called it in. We went on alert, and I responded. And while I was driving out there, it played out over the radio. This object came in rapidly and approached the entry control point, stopped and hovered again at low altitude, not far from the witnesses. There were 5 people watching this happen, and other people on the base watching the light come in. But 5 people that were there. And again, this was another enormous craft or object, at least 100 yards, probably bigger. Rectangular, and as it approached, the light went out, and it was just this black matte kind of featureless object, this big rectangular flying building, and my friends stared at it for about 45 seconds, and then it just shot off. This time it went north. So I heard all that play out over the radio. I got on scene a few minutes later. I talked to everyone. And again, everybody had the same basic story. People, they were shocked out of their minds. They were in disbelief. Some people were panicked, And then same thing. We put together a report, witness statements, upchanneled all the information.
I want to point out that, to my knowledge, this is in no way the only set of incidents that have taken place at Vandenberg. There is the famous incident in 1964 reported by Bob Jacobs of an overfly of a long-range photographic tracking of an Atlas missile, and a UAP comes into frame. Of course, the footage captured, but was removed, scrubbed, destroyed. We don't know. And I want to kind of ask you about this potential pattern around missile testing, but also the space deployment of what you've described in some of your interviews as our most advanced and emergent new capabilities, one of a kind technologies being deployed into space. I think in the 2005 incident, in your roundtable with the Soul Foundation, you described this as being a game-changing piece of technology in the war on terror. I was assuming it would be some sort of space-based satellite observing capability or something like that. But when you see a pattern of these potential observations and incursions into actual missile tests. I think also of the 1962 Bluegill triple prime nuclear test in the Johnston Atoll. This came out of the testimony of Harold Malmgren, in which there was a high altitude test of a nuclear warhead, and a UAP was observed in the plume, and I believe fell out of the plume. What do you make of that? Is there a pattern here, and what might we suggest or infer about kind of the purpose behind these incursions or this observation?
Yeah, that's the thing. There's definitely a pattern, but what does the pattern mean, right? And what other patterns are overlaid on that pattern? Because there seems to be a geographic component to some of these sightings. Like there are hotspots, right? Catalina Island. I just got back from a trip in Spain where there's a mountain range where orbs are seen by, the locals. So it could be something like there's a geographic pattern where these things are active. And then you overlay that with, now you have a high-tech Air Force base in the right geographic location, near the ocean, near the mountains, right? But there's definitely some kind of interest by these objects in our technology, because these objects were flying right up to the launch pad, like right up to it. And, that can't be random. So the pattern,
quite a daytime display of presence, and it almost makes me wonder if there's an intentional form of signaling going on. Is it a show of presence or a show of force? What would we infer about its intentions based on that behavior?
Yeah, and it boils down to to curiosity. There seems to be some interplay, right? Because it's not that they just fly in and examine the rocket and fly off, right? There's a performance playing out. First, they reveal themselves, right? It's always a light over the ocean with the Vandenberg cases, right? Except for the initial one. It was already there when they came out. But all the other incidents, it appears as a light, and then it attracts your attention. And then as you pay attention to it, then it starts to perform for you. It starts to maneuver or change luminosity or the color of the light. So there's some kind of interaction happening. Yeah. That it notices that you have finally noticed it. It performs to make sure that you understand it's anomalous, and then they come in. And then they examine the rocket or the pad or the people or whatever. So that's that's like the underlying pattern that I'm focusing on now. Like, there is an interplay, right? Right. They're choosing to do it when people are actively aware. If it was surveillance, they could come in, at an opportune time in heavy fog or inclement weather conditions, and why would they need to be so close, right? Like we do surveillance from space. We can look down at a launch pad in a different country or whatever, at a ship in the ocean. We don't need to get right up to the object, but they're doing that. Right. So you have to ask that unpacks a whole bunch of questions. Why? Like, can't they do that from space? Can't they do that, with a different kind of technology, or on and on?
Right. And I understand that you're a firsthand witness to that kind of behavior in the incident that took place at your home backyard with several other service members, in which this luminous object, you sighted it at a distance, and then it seemed to approach you and the other observers and came within several hundred yards.
Yeah.
So what do you make of that kind of that close approach aspect to the phenomenon of these craft actually approaching personnel on the ground and possibly either engaging with them through some kind of unknown telepathic or psychic form of connection, or simply putting on some kind of show of presence for them to impress or to form some kind of interaction?
Yeah, like that's the question. Like, what is the intent of it, right? So with my personal sighting, the thing that struck me over the years that I just can't get out of my head, the most critical one of the most critical data points. Before my friend Phoenix noticed the light, the three of us were having this deep conversation about UFOs and about all the things that had happened in 2003 leading up to 2005. We're having this deep, rich discussion. And part of that was because both of these friends of mine, Phoenix and Brandon, they're both military brats. Phoenix's parents were Air Force. Brandon's dad was Navy. And Brandon was telling us about his father's UFO encounter in the Navy that his father doesn't talk a lot about. But I think this happened in the late 80s or early 90s and at an Air Force or a Navy base up in Seattle. And his father, there was another like incursion on the base, and his father witnessed these objects flying over the ship or whatever. And Brandon was telling us that story. And while we were in this, very deep conversation, Phoenix was distracted by the light. And finally she said, we were like, what are you looking at? She said, do you guys see that weird light? And then the encounter played out. Right. And then it went through all those patterns. First it's just very strange. We're trying to figure out that's probably a satellite or atmospheric effect. But then eventually all the doubt is removed because it performs. It does something that is inexplicable. And then in our case, it literally just came down and hovered 200 feet over the house.
I'm curious, in that incident over your home, did you experience any electromagnetic interference, anything anomalous in that sense, or any strange physical sensations, maybe brain or neurological activity?
No, not that I remember. I was so intent on what was happening, nothing like that. It was just I was locked in disbelief, in awe. I kept looking at my friends, making sure, like, is this real? And I did have a moment of like primal terror as it was hovering, after it started to move away. This thought came into my head. I'm like, oh my God, did it abduct my family? Or is it going to abduct us? Like I had this moment where like the adrenaline just shot through me.
Right.
But then I just took a breath, and then it went back to the wonderment.
Yeah.
And then we just watched it kind of gently, go up into the stars. But
well, that's interesting. I mean, I think that kind of instinctual response is so natural, right? If some very anomalous object or entity were to approach you, you would have a fear response. Fear is a very valuable emotion. It's kept us alive. It's led to our evolution, and but so many people who report close approaches on the ground almost report being kind of lulled into this state of calm, of anomalous calm, really, right? That doesn't really match the nature of the way the craft approaches them, and the brilliant bright lights, the sensations, etc. So it's interesting, that maybe you had an instinctual response that kind of powerfully came through. Makes sense. You mentioned intent, and that's a big focus of mine is considering the possible and probable scenarios of intent. From everything you've seen, from everyone you've talked to, your study and studenthood of this phenomenon, what would be the probable scenarios that you would surmise, especially based upon the intelligent activity and behavior of UAP around these extremely high value, high consequence, sensitive facilities and sites that have been observed?
Yeah, that's the tricky question, right? Because I think we're dealing with a multitude of things. I don't think it's one thing.
Right.
I think I'm in a state now where my fundamental suppositions are that reality is much more mysterious and strange and bizarre than we can possibly imagine. And that's really what we're dealing with. We're dealing with reality itself. So, and that could be a multitude of things. We could be dealing with extraterrestrials that are coming from somewhere else to here. If that's the case, then what's the intent? They're surveilling us, right? For what reason? What's the motivation? Who knows? But
Right.
that's number one. And then I keep coming back to the idea of they're curious, and kind of where I am with my frame of mind right now is that I think reality is sort of like what happened when we discovered the microscope, right? We invented it. We look down into base reality and we find out it is alive and full of different life forms and bacteria and viruses and all kinds of things that we were unaware of, right? We're swimming in life.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that plays out on a large scale too. I think that, reality itself is just full of life. And a lot of the things that are alive and around us, we can't see, just like we can't see bacteria.
Right.
So I think some of it could be
something looking down and in to see what's gestating down here and what it's doing to the environment itself and the general ecology.
right.
Some have posited kind of like a benevolent ecologist's angle, which is, we're being watched, observed. But in that scenario, you want to back out. You don't want to, affect the wildlife too much. You want to see how they perform and function in their natural state. I think some of what the phenomenon presents to us is a kind of transgressing of that kind of nominal boundary where, it is more down and in. There are these incursions that they are affecting electromagnetic signatures, systems, cognition potentially. There may be physical on the ground encounters. So yeah, and it could be a variety of engagements taking place within a larger ecosystem of interacting life forms. So much to be explored. Here's a question from Henry from my platform Forerunner. Thank you, Henry, for sharing. I find it astounding that it is relegated, this is regarding the Vandenberg incidents, relegated to base security to detect UAP when clearly the Air Force must possess advanced sensor packages to detect any aerial or spatial incursions or threats to our nuclear arsenal. The lack of any formal acknowledgement, surprise, or tactical response implies either a cover-up, a tacit collusion between the Air Force brass and a non-human intelligence, or outright submission or surrender. Would you concur or have any further insights on what the nature of the relationship between the Air Force brass and this non-human intelligence might be?
That is, Henry, that is the $1 million question, right?
My audience asks $1 million questions.
Yeah,
We forego the $100,000 ones and go right to the meat of the matter.
Yeah. So that's the thing, right? The Air Force they need to be in this conversation and they are not. Right. And that is by design. So if you look at the history of the Air Force.
And I just to that point, by design, that's such a fascinating way to say is by design. What is that design? Who is designing that exclusion of this authoritative body with all of their capabilities from the conversation?
Yeah. And part of it is Air Force culture, right? So the Air Force is kind of born out of World War II. The CIA comes online. The Air Force goes online the same year. Hoyt S. Vandenberg he leaves the CIA and becomes the chief of staff for the Air Force in 1947, right? So you've got this blend right at the beginning of the end of, World War II, where the CIA, the intelligence state, and the Air Force are collaborating to dominate the planet. And they're doing that through the use of technology, nuclear weapons. And that program has, the biggest security blanket over it. So the Air Force operates in complete secrecy. They have the highest and most tyrannical security protocols imaginable. And we operate in that space, right? So when you're dealing with nuclear security, the rules and procedures are so strict, and the punishment for violating them is so severe, it's career ending, right? You make one mistake dealing with this kind of information and
we heard from the DOE language in the Age of Disclosure documentary that it might be life ending. Who knows?
Yeah,
not just career ending.
Exactly. So that's the culture in the Air Force. And that's what the military police enforce, that culture, right? It's strict adherence to rules and secrecy. And even to the point where if you step over the wrong line, we come out with weapons and handcuff you. Like, it's serious. So the secrecy is just cultural. And then you've got this phenomenon that we seem to have absolutely no control over. And that's in the historical record, right? So the Air Force, how do they manage it? They can't stop these incursions. Maybe they can't even detect when they're going to occur. So they can't even let people like me know, hey, there's a UFO inbound, take precautions if there are any we can take.
Right.
So that's part of it. Like, I don't think we're in control of our skies. And that keeps playing out over, in the historical record. We just had the New Jersey drones, which I lived through, the Langley incidents, what's playing out in Europe right now.
Right.
So that's the thing. The Air Force is not in the conversation. They're operating with complete immunity. They don't answer to Congress. So that's part of what we need to push for. We need whistleblowers to come out to talk about what the DoD and the intelligence community is actually doing and what they actually know, because we don't.
You've talked about this extreme classification of reality, right? And I'd like to get into your thoughts on the reasons for that effort. And I mean, you just might have shared one, which could be one of several. It may not be one alone, which is we are not in control of our skies. And, this is the U.S. Air Force we're talking about. That's their job, that they were created not just to control our skies, but the world's to deploy across domains globally. Let's talk through, some of the reasons behind the severity of the cover-up and the secrecy beyond just the institutional intransience, the culture, the way these institutions like the Air Force are set up for extreme secrecy. That makes total sense. Like, we have to just take that into account. Like, that is the apparatus, right, by design. But in terms of like some of the more basic, non-national security related aspects to this, like simply the existence of intelligent activity in the skies, in the oceans, in international oceans, right? What do you think are the kind of fundamental reasons for the severity of the overclassification of this?
Yeah, another $1 million question. That's the thing. It could be anything, right? And I try to boil everything down to some starting point, right?
Right.
And I think what it is reality is so strange and bizarre that if we found out about what's really going on around us, that people would be shocked and they would not be able to actually accept and process.
So it's really societal preparedness and the ontological shock of the basic realizations about what is real.
Right. And just pick your poison, right? Let's just say it's an ET. It's a one race from another planet, and they've been coming here for 80 years. Just that alone is enough to just destroy people's like operating paradigm, right?
Yeah. Especially back in the 50s and 60s when people were more religiously minded. And also there were theories at the time that there might be alien life on Mars or Venus, which were then later disproven. But the sense of an imminence of invasion, right? That if there's another intelligence in the solar system, that could really scare people.
Yeah.
Now, of course, we're in a different age now. We're in the age of science and reason, we would hope. And hopefully the public can handle more.
Yeah. And I think we can. And part of that might be because of enculturation, right? We have been shown movies for the last 40 years about extraterrestrials and visitations and time travel and all these other things. And they all blend into the phenomenon. Like, we don't know what we're dealing with. But when you talk about the phenomenon, you can't help but talk about all the woo, right? It's time travel, timelines, psychic abilities, spiritual, practices. It's all tied in some way, some shape and form. So imagine that, the universe actually is infinite and complex and strange and mysterious beyond our comprehension. And there are things out there that can interject in or show up, and we can
Mhm.
interact with these creatures or objects or whatever we're dealing with, right?
Yeah.
And that would completely disrupt the human experience as such right now, knowing that truth.
Right.
So it could be something like that the government is privy to information that the general public has been told not to pay attention to, right?
Hmm.
Like, so I think that's at the crux of it.
Yeah. Right. Right. I like the way you just phrased that, public awareness as such, right? Because as such, that's not a neutral state. It's actually it's a steady and existing state that many groups and powerful entities like governments have found ways to benefit from. And so when you change thinking as such, right, it topples hierarchies, it inverts pyramids, it radically changes the way information, money, devotion, and compliance flow between individuals and the power structures in the world. So it makes a lot of sense. Just to revisit the question, do you have any further insights on the nature of the relationship between the U.S. Air Force and a potential non-human intelligence? There are kind of increasing um, degrees of testimony from other former Air Force who have talked about coordination, possible meetings or agreements. Any insight on your side or anything you've heard from other witnesses or whistleblowers regarding the potential collaborative infrastructure or arrangements that might historically have existed?
Nothing beyond what's already out in the community.
Yeah.
All the lore, the landings at Harlem and on and on,
Hmm.
these different interactions, but nothing concrete. But that was one thing at the hearing that, when I got to meet Dylan Borland, and him and I have become very good friends, along with, Matthew Brown
Yeah.
and some of these other people. But then I get to know Dylan, and then it's like one of these craft were on the base or near the NASA hangar, right? And then that opens up these questions like, was that just a coincidence? Like what happened at Vandenberg? Like they just showed up,
Hmm.
did their thing, and then bounced? That could be the
Right.
same thing. Or did it come out of the hangar? Like Dylan's not
Right.
sure.
Right.
So this is another question. The Air Force is completely silent on this
Hmm.
topic. They should be at the forefront of the topic. They are in control of our airspace, right?
Right.
So
Yeah, I think we're rapidly blowing through the highway barricades in this journey to the truth, where you're not even supposed to know that there's a non-human form of technology. Okay, that's true. That it's controlled or piloted by a biological sentience, per David Grush, as of 2 weeks ago. Okay, that's a new barricade we blow through. And then I heard Dylan's testimony and listened to it with a fine-tooth comb about that matte black craft appearing to elevate. Was it behind the NASA hangar, from the NASA hangar? Right. I mean,
yeah,
and he doesn't know, and we don't know, but it just we're getting to this fundamental singularity of them and us,
yeah,
of how long have they been here, where are they present, who have they contacted, have they attempted to transact or make agreements in any respect with any power center in the world, be it
right,
federal, non-governmental, non-state, etc. And what has potentially kind of been passed across the fence line between us
right.
and them in terms of technology, information, etc. So we're getting closer to that point of singularity, which is very much the focus of Emergent. So if you're watching this episode here with Jeffrey, you're in the right place. This is where we ask those kinds of questions and venture into responsible speculation and kind of the new front lines of this interactive event. It really is, like you're saying, Jeffrey, earlier in the show. They make themselves known, right?
Right.
And then they change their proximity. They typically get closer, right? There might be some signaling involved. So right there, I think what we're looking at is an interactive phenomenon and the potential formation of a relationship in which perception is taking place in both directions, information is flowing, into all of our five senses and beyond them, possibly. So I
Right.
think this is where we blow through that kind of well, this is an aerospace phenomenon. It's maybe it's hard craft, but it might just be phenomena. No, I think this is interactive. It's
Yeah.
intelligent.
Yeah. Agreed.
Yeah.
And imagine if whatever the phenomenon is so bizarre
Right.
that it's not even physical, but it can create physical objects, right? It can just
Hmm.
coalesce the elements into a craft for you, and that's the thing. We have no idea what we're dealing with. It could be
Right.
something that bizarre. Like if you're thinking UFO, it gives you UFO. If you're thinking like tall white alien, it gives you that,
Mm-hmm.
and it's
Right.
not a hallucination. Maybe it's physical. Like, who
I
knows?
mean, let's just do a thought experiment. If you were a hypersentience, right, and you had evolved over, you know, hundreds of thousands of years as a civilization and had found ways of manipulating perception in a kind of non-contact form. So instead of just injecting chemicals into the bloodstream, you can actually affect perception at distance, either with technology or with the power of mind. And you encountered another life form and wanted to, who knows, maybe you wanted to co-inhabit their space or transact something with them, make deals, or possibly integrate with them, and you had the ability to control their perception of you, wouldn't you want to figure out what it is they would want to see that would make them most comfortable, most receptive, um, most wanting what it is that you want, and then kind of command that perception? Why would you leave it purely in its natural state? And so I think we are blowing into this new environment of perception, of consciousness, and we have to go beyond the superficial kind of subjectivity of, hey, I felt good in the experience, or here's what I saw, to imagine scenarios where, well, maybe you were shown that for a specific reason, and maybe there's a form of mimicry at hand, um, or masking or cloaking of one's presence, which, by the way, are things that happen all throughout the animal kingdom, right? This is all
Yeah,
too natural,
yeah,
right? Creatures cloak themselves all the time. They take on they take on the appearance of other life forms and mimic their behavior in order to do everything from take advantage of their food supply to take their young,
yeah,
right? That actually happens in the ant in the insect kingdom, where certain insects will mimic others to take their young and grow them for their own purposes. So
yeah.
it's these kind of behaviors are right there in the natural record, right?
Right.
And so though it looks extremely woo or fringe or terribly bizarre, I think we have to expand our lens and take in what we even know based on our own knowledge base of science.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it could be something that, like the cryptoids, it's something that evolved in the ocean. It's been here sentient for millions of years, deep in the water, and then eventually figured out how to come up out of the water. And when it comes up out, we're the aliens, right? It's in outer space. It's,
Right. We're in
it
their inner
could,
space.
yeah, who
What are you
knows?
doing in my inner space? Yeah,
Right.
these right, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, interesting stuff. And yeah, maybe in part two we can get into some more theories and kind of play out some thought experiments further. I want to move into this topic of advancing transparency and public awareness on this issue, which I know you're passionate about, giving the public access to awareness of reality
Right.
itself. In your view, what is the single biggest obstacle today, December 2025, to getting this into the public and getting mainstream society to consider this as a reality? What's the
Mhm.
main obstacle?
It's the stigma. We have been taught, we've been trained, we've been encouraged to not look up, to
Hmm.
write things off, to not believe what we see, not believe what we hear, to second guess ourselves, to turn away from spiritual practices and look at measurements and weights, right? In that kind of reality.
Hmm.
And I think we're in a turning point now where we've gone too far into the materialistic realm, and we've kind of written off all of human observation, right? So who knows how long modern humans have been anatomically modern, right? But absolute minimum 300,000-400,000 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
And we've been recording in our most important documents from the dawn of time interactions with the strange and mysterious, right? We look up, we see lights. We're in the desert, we see a burning bush. We're in the forest, there's lights over the swamp. And those are the things that we found as humans to chronicle, to
Mm-hmm.
talk about over and over and over again. And and people just used to believe that the world was strange and enchanted. And then we were trained not to believe that. And I
Mm-hmm.
think, that's got a short shelf life. And we're
Right.
coming out of that now because people are alive in the world and they're running into the strange and mysterious, right?
Mm-hmm.
So now we're having to question and try to reintegrate science and mythology or the spiritual. So overcoming that stigma is the biggest hurdle.
Hmm.
Because the government, think about, like, if a congressman, let's say they have a briefing, they've seen the real evidence and they know, and they could come out and actually give
Right.
a press conference on that. But will they?
Right.
Just because of the stigma,
Right.
right?
Why would they? I mean, they
Why?
are an elected official. Their career is built upon public consensus support for them leading their constituents, their districts. So why would they come out if there is no appetite or interest or public conversation taking place?
Right. So
Right.
that's the biggest thing, and that's where I have hope because that stigma is dropping. You know,
Mm-hmm.
and it's going to continue as more people come out, more witnesses, more documentaries are made. The age of disclosure is going to have a huge impact, on just regular, everyday people, because they're going to see people like me and
Mm-hmm.
people in government talking about this in a really, like, sincere and honest way. You know,
Yeah. Right.
yeah. That
Jeffrey, I want to back up for a sec because you touched on a really important point, and I'm glad you did. And it's this disassociation from the other side, the mysterious side of life in the West. And in some ways, I think that this issue is raging in the West. There's this expansion of our concept of extraterrestrial or cryptoterrestrial, ultra-terrestrial into non-human intelligence, a more all-encompassing term to allow people to shift back into a paradigm in which there's other intelligences at play. There's other layers to reality. It's not all just weights, measures, and sensors. And so we've gotten so fixated on the hard nuts and bolts of life. And here's the phenomenon, or I should say phenomena, of life itself at play in our space, and we can't perceive it. It's like we can't perceive it. I had Michael Safone, the director of the Society for UAP Studies, on a couple of weeks ago, and he really called this out powerfully. I asked him, why the obfuscation? Why the inability to deal with this in science? And he said a number of reasons, but one is that it cannot be, therefore it isn't.
Yeah.
Therefore, let's figure out why there is this delusion, this mass panic, this whatever. Whereas it's really the contrapositive of that. It is actual, meaning it has been perceived, and sensors have corroborated that on top of it. And therefore, we have to figure out how it is possible. And that's where you expand into the dimensions of reality and broaden the lens. So it almost feels like the West is being brought back into kind of the fold of a larger sense of reality itself. Interestingly, I rarely hear much analysis or commentary on how disclosure of this issue is considered in the East or in the global South. It seems to be very much a Western, U.S., Europe type conversation right now. And I think shifting it more internationally could actually help.
Absolutely.
And that, right. And you might see broad open acceptance and total zero stigma over this in places like India and maybe Africa and elsewhere, who are
Right.
really not a part of the conversation. But
Yeah.
reducing the stigma in the West, it's on a rapid decline. And so it'll be interesting to see with that dropping to, not zero, but getting as low as it can go, what then rises in response? What kind of citizen response? And I'm curious, your thoughts on what would move this forward outside the DoD, the IC, the government, in society at large, especially as stigma reduces, citizen science, citizen activism, the international conversation? What could really take this into a new phase?
That's a good question. I think the track we're on is the right track. I think continuing to have serious, nonpartisan hearings in Congress is the way to go. But I think we have to have a larger, broader conversation with the American people. And I'm not exactly sure how that plays out, but
Mm-hmm.
it's not just one group. It's got to be a group effort. And we have to
Right.
make people give people a safe place to speak openly about this, and that's happening. So I think really the artists are going to lead the way in the future. It's going to be people that are very prominent, in Hollywood or in the art world, or musicians. It's already starting to happen. People are coming out and they're sharing their little UFO story here and there.
Mm-hmm.
I think you're going
Yeah.
to see a swell of that, and people are going to start talking in groups openly about the phenomenon.
Yeah.
And that's going to embolden and encourage regular people to join their voice, and it's just going to be an organic thing. The more we push, the more it becomes more mainstream, the more people
Mm-hmm.
will be less afraid to talk about it.
Interesting. Yeah, I was part of hosting, gosh, might have been 22 years ago, a private art exhibit of the artwork of an individual named Ellen Mitchell, who essentially only drew art of the non-human. And so we put that on in my locale here. But yeah, what a fascinating kind of line of approach, which is to get other artists out there to have a global art display of the art of the non-human. I feel like Jeffrey Kripal and Rice University need to be a part of that one.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, interesting. I want to ask this question. This is from another member of Forerunner, Alessandro from Italy. Hi, Reed. First thing it comes into mind is to sincerely thank Jeffrey for the courage of his testimony. My mind is bogged down in trying to understand why in Italy we are so inert on the topic. It seems to me that the press and the mainstream media are here more tightly kept, or they are keeping themselves muzzled than it appears to be in the USA. Or maybe it's just a matter of a different language and the distance, the ocean in the middle. So that is seen. So it is seen as a local and internal USA debate, when actually it is a global world issue. Yet I wonder if there are military dictates from the USA or allies that enforce this here, kind of to keep it a low profile issue. Maybe Jeffrey is aware of anything on this respect. So I get you were just in Italy actually for the Seoul Symposium, and I've heard this from others in Western Europe and actually in Italy specifically, that Italy will not do anything. The Italian government will not budge if the U.S. government does not tell them to. And I wonder if that's just a de facto state post World War II, right? We were the victors. Mussolini and Italy were the non-victors. Or is there a more overt kind of hierarchical relationship that around this issue?
I think it's a blend. I mean, our national security apparatus has their tentacles and influence everywhere, but I think it could also be cultural. Mm-hmm. But here's what I learned when I was in Italy, talking to Europeans from all over Europe and from people from Asia, people from all over the world who were in Italy for Seoul. And it was shocking to me. No one in Europe was aware that there had been 3 congressional hearings. They didn't know who David Rush was. They don't know about any of it. So Europe is in the dark. What's going on in the U.S. is not being played on the media in Europe.
Interesting.
Now, that's probably a little bit different depending on where you're at. I know Japan. I have a lot of friends in Japan. They're engaged. They know about the hearings. It's covered here and there. But in Europe, it seems like there's very little information coming out from the U.S. to there. And I also learned that the European military is having their own UFO encounters, land, air, and sea, right?
I think of the Caronia incident in Sicily in 2004, the alleged downing of an Italian military helicopter by a UAP.
I'm not
uh,
familiar
and
with that.
yeah, in which a UAP fired what was alleged to be a directed energy weapon at the helicopter, damaged its rotor, caused a forced landing. And that information, that case actually, for which there is extensive documentation, go look that up on the internet. You'll find just about nothing. It
Yeah.
is radio silence, and this is where it's like there is a serious program at hand, whether human or non-human or both, to leave no trace
Yeah.
and to suck all hard physical evidence out of the public domain around incidents like that, where it's not just an observed craft, it's actually a kinetic encounter in the
Yeah.
air.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think, again, it's a blend. I think that the U.S., they are influencing media worldwide on every topic.
Hmm.
And there's also, I don't think the Europeans want to talk about not being in charge of their skies, because right now that's playing out in Europe.
Right.
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 I'm even hearing that they're attempting to shoot down these objects. I don't know if that's accurate or not, but the governments do not want people looking up and paying attention to what is happening. They want us
Right.
looking down and working.
Looking down at our devices.
Yeah.
Used to
Yeah.
be at the newspaper. Now it's something much more engrossing.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So we are, people are less in touch with reality, nature, the environment than ever before. We're ensconced in our virtual me, myself, and I play worlds on our devices and so forth. So people are largely not looking up. And that's interesting. I had heard the same from the Seoul Symposium, that some folks from Europe came and were shocked to see this conversation taking place. They had no idea, and they were there out of curiosity. And I was thinking, like, no, this is the European convening of the issue.
Yeah.
And it's almost like there's not only a media blackout, there's an international distribution blackout regarding this issue, because either that or yes, Western liberal media and culture is on the decline in terms of its influence in the world. But man, when Congress talks about anomalous incursions over nuclear facilities, I would imagine the other nuclear powers and their populations would be paying attention to that.
You would think, yes.
You would.
Especially because we have bases in most of their countries too, right?
Yeah, exactly. Right. Oh, well, maybe that could be
Yeah.
part of it too.
Could be.
Yeah. Well, Jeffrey, this has been fantastic, and we're not done. So if you're watching and would like to see part 2 of our conversation, please head over to the YouTube members. Jeffrey and I are going to talk about whistleblowers, witnesses, military veterans, how to get more voices out into the public, and what the key change agents would be to facilitate that process. So with that, head on over there. I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Jeffrey Nuccetelli. In After Hours, the part 2 of this conversation, Jeffrey and I talk more about the classification of reality itself, exploring the apparatus that controls the flow of information, not just regarding UAP, but about the fundamental insights into the nature of our existence that it would suggest. We'll talk about efforts to obfuscate Congress, to prevent whistleblowers from stepping forward with lawful disclosures, as well as efforts to disinform and misinform the public. Finally, we'll look at key lines of effort that are underway and ways that you can be a part of helping move the needle toward greater public transparency on this issue. If you'd like to see After Hours, head over to the members only section of YouTube. It's right here on my channel. Just click the subscribe button. Also, you can get After Hours content for free by joining Forerunner, the community platform I built to support those who want to take their inquiry further and into the future and begin examining the intentions of the phenomenon and their implications for humanity. With that, thank you for watching Emergent. Keep looking up, keep asking the hard questions, and keep examining the nature of the phenomenon. And I'll see you at the next episode of the show.